The porch light was off. It was just past 6 in the morning, that gray hour before the sun decides anything, when the world still belongs more to the night than the day, and the only sounds are the ones nobody's awake to notice. A sprinkler ticking on 2 houses down, a garbage truck groaning somewhere blocks away, the small electrical hum of a street lamp deciding whether to give up yet. Ryan Carter opened the front door, already dressed for his shift, travel mug in one hand, keys clenched between his teeth the way he always carried them when his hands were full and his mind was somewhere else entirely, and stopped. There was a book sitting on the top step, wrapped in brown paper, tied with plain string, the kind you'd find in a kitchen drawer, not a gift shop. No tag, no card, nothing that explained itself. He looked left, then right, the way a man looks when he's certain there's a joke somewhere, and he just hasn't found the person laughing yet. The street was empty. A dog barked once, somewhere distant, and gave up just as quickly, as if even the dog had decided this wasn't worth the effort. He crouched down, picked the book up like it might be a trick, like it might be wired to something, the way 5 years of grief teaches a man to expect bad news to arrive quietly. He untied the string. A children's book, worn soft at the corners, the spine cracked in that particular way that only happens when something's been read and reread by someone who loved it, not just owned it. The title across the front was simple, almost plain, a story about a small lighthouse that was afraid of storms. He flipped it open, searching for a name. Inscription. A receipt. Anything that might tell him who had walked up his driveway in the dark and left this without a word. There was nothing on the title page. But inside the back cover, in small, careful handwriting, slanted slightly to the left like the hand that wrote, it was in a hurry to finish before changing its mind. There was a single line. Some people survive. Others learn to live again. He stared at it for a long moment. Read it twice. Then told himself, the way men like Ryan tell themselves most things, that it didn't mean anything. That it was probably just something librarians wrote inside donated books, some leftover habit from a discount bin or a schoolbook drive. He closed the cover. Behind him a small voice. His daughter, Sophie, 8 years old, hair an absolute disaster from sleep, the kind of furious cowlick that no amount of water could tame, stood in the doorway in mismatched socks, watching him with a particular focus that only children and detectives seem to possess. The kind of stare that misses nothing and asks everything. Is that for me? She asked. I don't know who it's for, Ryan admitted, still turning the book over in his hands like the answer might be hidden somewhere on the cover. She took it from him without waiting for permission, already certain in the way only an 8-year-old can be certain of anything. She ran her thumb along the worn corner of the cover, studying it the way she studied everything lately, like she was deciding whether or not to let it in. Dad, she said, I had a nightmare about the dark on Tuesday. I didn't tell anyone. He frowned. You told your teacher. Maybe, she said, already turning, already walking back inside with the book pressed against her chest like she claimed it fair and square. Ryan stood on the porch a second longer, his coffee going cold in his hand, staring at the empty spot where the book had been, as if it might explain itself if he just waited long enough. It didn't. 6 days later, same step, same hour. Another book. No card. No name. Then another the Monday after that. Then another. By the 4th week, Ryan wasn't surprised anymore. He was just standing there each Monday morning with his arms crossed, staring at his own front door like it owed him a confession. That was the week he finally saw her. He told himself he was just checking the mailbox early. That was the story he gave himself. Anyway, standing at the end of his driveway at exactly the hour the books always appeared, pretending to sort through bills he hadn't even gotten yet. It was a stupid plan. He knew it was a stupid plan. But some part of him, the part that had spent 5 years putting locks on every door in his life, wanted to see who kept finding a way in any way. A woman came around the corner of the street with a canvas tote bag over one shoulder and a paper-wrapped book in her hand, moving with the quiet, practiced ease of someone who had walked this exact path enough times to know precisely which floorboard on his porch creaked and which step to skip. She froze the moment she saw him standing there. This isn't what it looks like, she said. It's exactly 4 books in a row, left on my porch, by a complete stranger, Ryan said, arms still crossed. I think it's exactly what it looks like. She let out a breath and, almost out of habit, set the book down on the step anyway, as if the conversation happening in real time didn't change the delivery schedule. Her name was Claire Monroe. She explained, a little flustered now that she'd actually been caught. She was the children's librarian, new to town. She'd noticed his daughter coming in week after week, always gravitating toward the same shelf. Books about children who had lost someone, books about grief dressed up in gentle metaphors, so it didn't feel quite so much like grief. So she'd started leaving a few on his porch, hoping they might help in some small, quiet way. That was all it was. Nothing more complicated than that. You didn't think to just talk to me? Ryan asked. Knock on the door? Introduce yourself like a normal person? Claire looked at him for a long beat. Would you have answered the door for a stranger who wanted to talk to you about your dead wife? He didn't have an answer for that, which was, in its own way, exactly the answer she'd expected. She shifted her bag higher on her shoulder, suddenly awkward, caught in the open the way people are when a private kindness gets dragged into daylight. I'll stop, if it's weird. He thought about it for a moment, really thought about it, the way he hadn't let himself think about much of anything in longer than he wanted to admit. Sophie loved the lighthouse one, he said finally. Something in Claire's shoulders loosened, just slightly. I know, she told me. At the library. He almost smiled. Almost. 3 weeks after that, a storm tore through town and ripped half the shingles clean off Ryan's roof, flooding the hallway closet. The one with his late wife's coat still hanging inside it, untouched for 5 years, the one door in the house nobody opened without a reason. He was up on a ladder in the rain, swearing at a tarp that refused to stay in place, when Claire pulled into his driveway with 2 coffees balanced in a cardboard tray and a clipboard tucked under one arm. The community center runs a fundraiser for situations exactly like this. She called up to him. I already signed you up. I didn't ask you to do that, he called back. You didn't have to. That's generally how favors work, Ryan. He came down off the ladder slower than the rain really required, just to buy himself a second to fix the expression on his face before she could read it too clearly. Over the following 2 months, they fell into a kind of proximity that neither of them gave a name to, because naming it felt like admitting something neither of them was ready for. Folding tables at the community center, donated raffle baskets that always seemed to need one more volunteer to carry them. Sophie sprawled cross-legged on the library floor while Claire read picture books aloud and did every single voice badly on purpose, just because it made Sophie laugh until she had to lie down on the carpet to recover. One evening, after a fundraiser meeting, while they packed up folding chairs and Sophie slept curled on a beanbag in the back office, Claire said something without quite looking at him. My mom died 8 months ago, she said. That's actually why I moved here. I needed somewhere that didn't already know me as the girl whose mother just died. Somewhere I could just be a librarian for a while. Ryan was quiet for a moment, the chair in his hands forgotten. Sophie's mom's coat is still hanging in the hall closet, he said. 5 years now. It was the first time he had ever said that out loud to another adult. You don't have to explain that to me, Claire said gently. I know, he said. That's exactly why I'm telling you. Something passed between them in that moment. Something larger than either of them was prepared to put a name to yet, something that lived in the space just past where words usually reach. It was an ordinary Tuesday, nothing special about it, no warning in the weather or the light, when Ryan stopped by the library to drop off a donation form and overheard, entirely by accident, the head librarian congratulating Claire on a job offer in Seattle, asking when she'd be leaving. For months, Claire said. She hadn't told anyone yet. She certainly hadn't told him. Ryan didn't say a word. He simply set the form down on the counter and walked back out into a parking lot that suddenly felt far too bright for the hour, the sun glaring off car windshields like an accusation. That night, on the phone with her, he was short, distant. When she asked what was wrong, he told her nothing was wrong, which, of course, was the loudest possible way of saying that everything was. What he didn't say, what he could barely admit, even to himself, was the truer thing underneath it. 4 or 5 years he had told himself that staying loyal to a woman who was gone was the safest kind of love a man could offer, because a memory could never leave him the way a living person could. Claire leaving fit a story he had already half written about himself, long before she ever showed up with a paper-wrapped book in her hands. It was easier, somehow, to let the distance between them grow than to risk finding out he'd been wrong about all of it. Over the following weeks, the warmth between them cooled into something careful and polite, the kind of politeness that exists specifically to paper over the things people are too afraid to say. Sophie noticed first. Children always do. They read a room the way adults forget how to. "Did you and Claire have a fight?" she asked one evening, watching her father stare at nothing over the kitchen table. "We didn't have a fight," he said. "Then why do you both look like someone died?" He didn't have an answer for that one either. Into this particular silence walked a man named Ethan. Tall, easy smile, the kind of effortless confidence that only comes from a life where nothing has ever truly cost him anything. Claire's former fiancée. He found her at the library on a slow weekday afternoon, leaning against the front desk like he'd never left. "I know I don't get to just show up," he said. "No," Claire said. "You don't. I made a mistake letting you go," Ethan said. "I want to fix it. There's already a house picked out, 2 blocks from your old place, the one you always said you loved. I'd marry you tomorrow, Claire, if you let me." She didn't say yes. But that night, alone in her kitchen with a glass of water going untouched on the counter, she let herself actually imagine it. Not Ethan exactly, but the shape of the life standing behind him. A city where nobody's grief was hers to carry. No widower's careful silences to learn like a second language. No little girl whose whole heart she could accidentally break just by getting on a plane one day. It would be easier. She stood there a long time with that thought, and the fact that it would be easier was precisely what frightened her about wanting it all. She didn't say no fast enough, either. And that hesitation, that single unguarded pause, was the only part of the story that made it back to Ryan secondhand, garbled through someone else's mouth a few days later. He assumed the worst. The way people do when they've spent years quietly rehearsing loss, waiting for it, almost expecting it the way you expect rain in a certain season. He pulled back from Claire entirely. Stop calling. Stop stopping by the library. He told himself it was respect, giving her room, doing the noble thing, when really it was the same old habit dressed up in nicer clothes, leaving first, so he'd never again have to stand somewhere and watch someone walk away from him. Sophie watched her father go quiet again, the exact same quiet he'd worn for years before the book started showing up on the porch, and she decided, with the particular stubbornness only an 8-year-old can summon, that she was not going to let it happen twice. She went hunting through every book on her shelf, the entire stack collected over the last 5 months, and found, written small and careful inside each back cover, a single handwritten line. She'd seen the very first one months earlier and dismissed it as nothing. She had never once thought to read them all together as a set until now. Some people survive. Others learn to live again. You don't have to stay in the same chapter forever. Being loyal to the past is not the same as living in it. She laid every single book out across the kitchen table in a careful row and waited for her father to come home from his shift. When he walked through the door, she simply pointed. "Dad," she said, "these weren't for me." He picked one up, then another, and slowly, far too slowly, far too late, he understood. He had been the one being written to this entire time. Every Monday morning, every quiet, unexplained kindness left on a doorstep before sunrise. A woman who had never once said the words out loud, saying everything anyway, in the only language she trusted enough to use. "She wasn't writing to you at all," he whispered. "I know," Sophie said. "I'm 8, not stupid." She crossed her arms, suddenly fierce in a way that startled him. "You're doing the thing again. The leaving before you can be left thing. I've watched you do it for 5 years, Dad, and I'm not going to watch you do it to her too." He looked at his daughter and didn't argue, because there was nothing left to argue with. "Go," she said simply. "I'll be fine. Mrs. Alvarez has cookies." He found out, through a hurried phone call to the library, that Claire was leaving that very evening, by train, an old habit inherited from her mother, who had hated flying her entire life. He didn't bother changing out of his uniform. He just ran. He reached the platform just as the boarding announcement echoed overhead, scanning every face in the crowd, panic rising in his chest at the thought that he might be too late for the one thing he'd never let himself try. And then he saw her, sitting alone on a bench near the far end of the platform, a single suitcase beside her, not boarding, just sitting as though she'd been waiting this whole time for something other than a train. "I'm not here to stop you from going to Seattle," he said, breathless. "Good," she said, almost amused despite everything. "Because I turned that job down 3 weeks ago." He stared at her. "What?" "I never want to Seattle," she said. "Ethan offered me an easy life, and for one night, I let myself want easy. But easy isn't the same thing as right, Ryan. What I really wanted to know was whether you wanted a future, or whether you just wanted an excuse to keep standing still and call it loyalty. So I waited, to see what you'd do with the room I gave you." "I did the wrong thing with it," he admitted. "Yeah," she said softly. "You did." "I kept her coat in that closet for 5 years," he said, "because taking it out felt like agreeing she was really gone. And I think I did the exact same thing with you. Kept you at a distance, so I wouldn't have to admit how much I didn't want you to leave." "That's the first true thing you've said to me in a month," Claire said quietly. "I'm not loyal to the past, Claire," he said. "I'm scared of the future. Those aren't the same thing. I just figured that out from an 8-year-old and a stack of library books." She smiled then, really smiled, the rare, full smile she'd been rationing out so carefully for weeks. He sat down beside her on the bench, the suitcase forgotten between them, and the train pulled slowly away from the platform without either of them aboard. A year later, the town held its annual book festival on the green behind the library. The same folding tables, the same donated raffle baskets, the same warm chaos as always. Except now a small girl wove determinedly through the crowd with a ring box she had been guarding zealously in her backpack since breakfast, refusing point-blank to let either adult anywhere near it. Ryan found Claire near the children's section, exactly where all of it had started, and got down on one knee in front of the very same shelf where her name still hung from a reading she'd given that morning. He didn't have a speech prepared. He had something better, a worn paperback copy of the Lighthouse book, open to the inside back cover, where beneath every line she had ever written to him without ever meaning to be caught, he had finally written one of his own. She read it, looked up at him, eyes wet. "Yes," she said. "Obviously yes." Sophie produced a ring like a magician finishing her best trick, grinning so wide it looked like it might actually hurt. "Took you long enough," she said. "The first book she left on his porch taught his daughter how to be brave. The last one taught him